Everybody, so today we're going to be reading, finally, The Consequences of Imagination's Fear. We are currently in chapter 13, but we're going to go back a chapter for the purpose of thy recap. Basically, if you guys don't remember, chapter 11 and chapter 12 kind of combine in, so it's kind of hard to kind of just do one, like, behind a chapter, but I'm going to try my best. So basically, if you guys don't remember about the whole fire scene and us practically passing out, we woke up again somehow on the couch, but disoriented. We came to find out someone stole all of our round items, even the clock, I think, and also shaved down the doorknobs for some odd reason to a certain shape. I think it was a square. And they covered all of the mirrors, all of them. And Wally was acting very, very weird. Like, weird. He would watch us no matter what, avoid our questions, and just try and keep us nice and relaxed. But we feel more strange and weirder, and I am theorizing personally that he put us, or somehow he brought us to another world or something, or took us out of reality, you know? And I'm not too sure, because at the very end of this, because we kept feeling more and more, and the only safe place that we could keep away from him was the bathroom. We took that to our advantage, got certain things to help us remember certain things, because we would forget and get dizzy and then not remember it at all. And then eventually it led up to us ripping the stuff off of the mirror so we can really look at ourselves, and I believe all we saw was just a lot of eyes, and while Wally was just screaming, no, don't do this, it's not worth it, and all that, and a lot of screaming was involved, and you kind of regret, you know, revealing, basically seeing yourself in the mirror, kind of. I'm not really sure yet if we were seeing ourselves or we were seeing, I don't know what we were seeing. It's a little confusing. But, and you were like, oh my god, I shouldn't have done this. I want to forget. And a whole bunch of stuff happens. A lot of secret code, which we did discuss last video, which was about a month ago. I'm so sorry, guys. Love stories, am I right? Anyways, after that jibber jabber and stuff, before we get started, here are the warnings. Following warnings, there will be mentions of mental health deteriorating, questionable existence, uncanny valley, and everything in this story is just going to seem very unnatural, or you may or may not question your reality after Wyan is questioning her own. Their own. Excuse me. Y'all have been warned. Y'all done? Alright. Now we are officially in chapter 13. Self-avoiding odyssey. Summary. Wolves and sheep are not to meet, lest the consequences be reaped. What happens if you learn there were no sheep? A lot of secret code that we're going to look definitely through the comments and possibly ourselves. Well, I'm going to keep this in mind, guys. Don't worry. You could feel the remnants of its presence. It slithered under your skin. An itching sensation like a scab demanding to be scratched off. Where the eyeballs had been, the numerous fleshy orbs bulging unnaturally. There was now the feeling of loss. It was like you lost a part of yourself. A part that not only never existed, but by all standards of human biology should never exist. It wasn't all gone, though. Even when uprooted, it left shards of itself within you. You could feel it. It felt not through physical means. Beyond the itching, there was a feeling like no other. It was a feeling of a world unknown. It was the feeling through the knowledge of more. A more that was left ambiguous. A more that was blurry and cryptic. More aware of it due to knowing that you didn't know it all. It was extraordinary, and it was terrible. It felt like you had been blind your whole life, only to finally gain sight in a non-use... I don't know how to say that word. Euclidean world. Hopefully I said that right. You were aware, yet unable to comprehend. You could feel the world around you like each particle of its own living creature. A shared network of pinging thoughts connecting it all out into one. It was felt without the use of vision or sound. The announcement of a greater existence that you are now privy to. You could tell the distance between you and whatever else purely by what whispers the object spoke. A language of not words. It was a language of concepts, and it was overwhelming. You could feel the very difference in the air in your lungs, a buzz of life, a newfound experience that to live is merely a fluke of the mind. If everything could feel, regardless of whatever organs it may lack, then what made you so special? There was no distinction between you and the other. The cinematics had evolved beyond such limitations. It became purely a matter of perspective, of whichever perspective you indulged in, whichever perspective you experienced in that moment. Drifting between being and not, you were speechless. For instance, you were the couch, yet the couch wasn't you. The fabric became your skin, the metal frame your bones. You could feel the weight of your body pressing down on your stuffed foam insides. You could feel the shape of your hand pressing onto the puffed arms. The warmth of your body seeped into the inanimate life, feeding comfort into emotionless existence. Except none of that was true, because at the same time it wasn't you. It was merely a couch, once you sat upon and nothing more. You could become all that was not with only a few thoughts. Become all that you weren't. Yet you were a ghost within yourself, a soul tied to your body, bound by human senses. You were forgetting to breathe, completely lost to the overwhelming experience. And it didn't limit itself to not only the couch, it was everything, from the walls of your apartment to the dust in the air. You felt everything like an extension of yourself, and you felt everything like you weren't a part of it. It was a duality that was too much to bear. You scratched at your arms, now sinking in too deep. You could still feel the sea of eyes, and they could feel you. Your vision was blurry with tears, but you didn't need sight to see. You sank into the couch, body like a rag doll, tears dripping down your face. They slid over your cheeks, darkening your shirt as they flowed free. You could feel them against your skin, and you could feel what it was like to free fall from your very own eyes. It was too much. The tears continued to drip. Vaguely, you could sense something moving, a presence both you and not. You could see yourself through its eyes, see yourself from not only your own. A hand gently grabbed yours, and you carefully grabbed the hand of the weeping person. You tasted fear and pity, loss and gain, lapping them up with an eager hunger. You savored the taste, for they were the only thing that weren't you. The hand pushed your body into laying position, steady and omnipresent. Your hand pushed the body onto the couch, shaking and afraid. The texture of the clothes against your hands was odd, the softness rubbing itself rather than expected skin. The texture of your clothes against your body felt odd, the light weight deceptively annoying, an insistent declaration of purpose. Your mouth opened to speak, and you waited patiently to hear the words. You were the one listening as you spoke, and you were the one speaking. The words were expected, and yet simultaneously they were the last things you expected to hear. Tears multiplied as a sob tore through the room, the hand running through your hair. What was it all for? If it was a wish to suffocate the very memories that birthed you, the very ones you fought to take back from the beyond, was the pain not worth the knowledge of knowing? Did you not deserve to know? Please. The words were bleeding, saturating syrup, cloying in the heavy air. Just make me forget. There was a pause, a long, miserable pause. The hand continued to drift through your hair, tenderness matched by the hushed whisper. Oh, neighbor, are you sure? Isn't this what you wanted? Your response was a ghost of yourself, low and mournful, between two painful sobs and the shaking of your head. Please, all I want to is forget. The other stayed with you until the world was silent, until you couldn't feel the strands of your own hair through fingers that weren't your own, until the pressure of furniture upon the floor didn't feel like knives digging into your back, until you were yourself once more. The root of the eyes finally severed from the soil of the flesh. Beyond that, you didn't know, because you were you. You pulled yourself up from the couch, awoken by the sound of scrubbing. The apartment was bright, brighter than it had been, so bright it bordered on blinding. You skewered your eyes shut, hands flying up to cover them partially as you slowly adjusted, black blobs fading in your vision. It was a sort of brightness that you could feel burning in the back of your eyes, a radiating ache that begged for shadows. As far as you could tell, however, there were none. Even as you now squinted, eyes nearly shut, you couldn't see any shadows. The few that were there were weak. No suggestions of shadows rather than true shadows. And they were too small to take residence in, forcing you to adapt. It was hard to look higher than your feet, but as the seconds ticked by, But as the seconds ticked by, you didn't have to squint so harshly. It wasn't right, but you didn't want to know. Had it always been this bright in here? Where exactly was all of the light coming from? Just by looking around, you couldn't find the culprit. Where there should be light illuminating the apartment, there weren't. Just the sad remains of wires dangling from holes in your ceiling. The only place the light would come from was from the windows. Yet the unnaturally still white curtains in front of the windows would block enough that it wouldn't be this harsh. You remembered the bitter taste of regret. It was like you were behind a panel of stained white glass, peering into a dollhouse rather than your own apartment. A veneer filter wrapping all the colors into warm pastels. The whites were painfully bright, the blacks now smoky gray. Blues were reminiscent of clear summer skies, the red rosy pinks and browns, a mix of dark creams and muddy corals. It was sweet, almost looking like icing on a cake rather than real life, but it was cold. Everything felt cold. It was a chill you felt within, even if the air was a lukewarm room temperature. Something didn't feel right, the room humming with offness. You could nearly taste it, like the air was infused with emotions. It was only made worse by the sound, a methodical scrubbing never ceasing, grating into the otherwise hushed environment. The only other sound was your breathing. There were no noises coming from beyond the windows, no leaves rustling in the wind, no birds chirping morning tunes, no animals scratching about. Not even the echo of cars rushing by on the road reached your lonely apartment, leaving you feeling incredibly isolated. All there was you and that scrubbing sound. It was rough, unfocused, edging on frantic. It continued at an uneven pace, cloth against tile, steel wood against ceramic. The more you listened, the louder it got, filling your ears, the scrubbing within your very skull. It swamped the otherwise peaceful lull, if you ignored the stark nothingness around you. The sound was accompanied by quiet, frustrated huffs of another person. You forgot other people existed. It was unnerving, like finding a bleeding vein in otherwise cooked meat. How could you forget that? You paused, frowning. How was there another person? Why was there another person? Who were they? Why were they cleaning your floor, out of all things they could be doing? You didn't feel threatened at all, but you also felt on edge, ready to act. You knew it wouldn't be Rosie, the only other person with keys to your apartment. She had them because she owned the place, and in her words, in the off chance that you took off and she needed to get in because she needed to be chatting away or offering you soup she miraculously made, not scrubbing the floor. Your fingers tapped as you thought. You lived alone in a place with few neighbors that was also fairly isolated. Even few knew of its location. And it wasn't like you were the type to forget if you lived with someone, though you very much knew that wasn't the case. It was an ingrained instinct to seek time for yourself, fueled by years of habit and the comfort of being alone. You believed, whether it was healthy or not, it didn't matter to you, that ultimately you only had yourself to depend on in the great scheme of things. It wasn't worth the troubles trying to depend on people you never fully trust, especially when it came to the important things. Perhaps, you'd admit, your independence was too extreme, leaving you to take on tasks that would have been simpler with assistance. But you weren't a fan of asking for help, whether it had been previously offered or not. You grew up well into the independence. You wore it like an old sweater, comfortable and broken in. It was a you problem, not something to bother other people with. You could stay independent without floundering under the weight of responsibility, without struggling with the pressure of autonomy. Really, you could. You managed perfectly fine up until if everything fell apart. But it wasn't because of something you did. You were merely a victim of the circumstance or of unfortunate coincidences. It was exciting, like your life finally had real meaning. And that was completely different than someone drowning under the consequences of their own over-independence because it wasn't your fault. It happened to you because Wally hijacked your phone to live there, not due to mistakes you made or fights of fancy. Truly, you were doing absolutely wonderful before that, so your self-reliance was definitely healthy and normal. Healthy and normal, your two favorite things to be. You love to lie to yourself, didn't you? And to Rose. She hated when people spoke like that. Said it was cruel to others. But you'd rather be alone. You blinked, forgetting the sound as realization struck. You could think again. Thoughts were blooming in the fertile soil of your mind, the fog finally parting them to let them flourish. There was only a loose pressure left in your head. A headache so minor compared to what you had had before that you could easily ignore it. It was a sleeping snake that no longer clenching down, satisfied with whatever meal it swallowed whole, leaving you to rest. You could finally remember that this wasn't all there was. Life wasn't just a series of days, hours, weeks. You still didn't even know how much time had passed. Spent in a naturally bright place playing board games with a character from an old, debatedly real puppet show. You had to say it. You had to say it. After all, it was your life. You knew where you were now. You remembered your name and your hobbies. You remembered that something was horribly wrong. It was relieving knowing some memories were completely gone. You sighed, fingers tapping faster as the sound continued. Was it the brightness that was wrong? It certainly didn't look right, but it wasn't alarming. Was it the lack of noise? That was certainly off-putting, for the nature around you never truly became quiet, but you had grown used to it, and it wasn't the noise alone, because even if you knew someone was there, you knew that it wasn't someone dangerous. You didn't think about how many memories were missing, just glad that they were. You counted to 3 before jumping off the couch, arms wrapped around your middle as a wave of dizziness hit. You cursed, stumbling into the arm of the couch, leaning on it for support. It seemed that while your thoughts were smoother, more your own, you were still disoriented. A newborn deer in a violently shaken snow globe, graciously trying to make your way through the snowstorm. You didn't let that stop you from learning the source of the noise. Progress slow and unsure. The world was wobbling, gravity pulling you to and fro. The kitchen was further away than you remember, taking thrice as long as it should just to reach the counter. The scrubbing continued undisturbed, unaware or uncaring of your approach. You peered over the counter, eyes wide. Wally was on his knees in your kitchen, cloth in hand and a bucket of murky water beside him as he scrubbed the floor. You shut your eyes and pinched yourself. Were you hallucinating? Had you finally lost it? You looked again, staring at the sight. Facing away from you, Wally Darling himself was on his knees in your kitchen, scrubbing away at the tiled floor. His blue pompadour was messy, strands of tangled, wavy hair loose around his face. He pushed the hair back, muttering things you couldn't make out under his breath, shoulders hunched and tight. From what you could see, his hands were now a golden orange from the water. Fingertips stained a grimy black. His clothes were disheveled, striped pants full of creases. His navy cardigan was unbuttoned and slipped off his shoulder. The dagger collar of his button-up dappled with various inky fingerprints. Carefully you reached out and poked his shoulder, leaping back with a cry when he was solid. You were hoping on some level that he was just a figment of your imagination, but he was too solid to be so. He was real, and he was actually physically in your kitchen. You were torn between running away and casually saying hello, because you had known to some degree. Instead, you froze, mind buffering. You knew all along, but it was so much nicer when you pretended that you didn't, because if he could be there, what could hop through that damn handy portal he made from your phone? That was what actually scared you, not Wally. You didn't know how to quite feel about Wally. When he spotted you, he shuffled around and grinned, his eyes nearly shut. Dropping the cloth, he cheerfully waved, seemingly unaware of the sheer confusion of his existence was causing. "Hello, neighbor. Fancy meeting you here." You stared, eyes wide, and it was trance-inducing. The colors he wore brighter than anything else in the apartment, like he alone was free of the pastel filter it was drowning in. It was bizarre seeing him in real life, no longer confined to a tiny screen all hand-drawn. You could see the felt texture of his skin, the soft knit of his sweater, the sheen on his Oxford shoes. "Wally, what the hell are you doing here?" He made a tutting noise and shot you a cat look. His pupils impossibly black. His eyes had the same glossy sheen as glass. Eyelids a tame orange that you couldn't tell if it was natural or makeup. His lack of nose surprisingly wasn't odd in the slightest, despite it being a feature faces typically have. It was strange. Putting him there was almost calming. Excuse me, but my English. It was strange, but him being there was almost calming. He shouldn't be here. And yet his presence was reassuring, familiar. He used his reflection in the oven glass. Hadn't that been blocked off? How was it reflective now? To fix his hair, tucking back the strands he could, he also straightened his cardigan, dusting off the shoulders and buttoning up to how it usually was. In the matter of seconds, he was able to compose himself, although you could still see the remains of his frazzled state. "Oh, friend, there's no need to be rude. I thought you'd be happy to see your guest helping out. After all, I've been here for a while." He leaned forward, still on his knees. He studied your face, brows knit with worry. "You do remember all the time we spent together, don't you?" You glared. "What are you doing in my kitchen?" He glanced around innocently, shrugging his shoulders. Your eyes narrowed. Still wary of the man puppet person? It was confusing. Before you had spent the last however long with him and he hadn't left the phone then, so why now? You weren't going to put up with excuses, and you could tell by the look he was giving, he wasn't going to play honest. Maybe you're dreaming, neighbor. You know I can't leave the phone. Just answer my question, Wally. Would you believe me if I said you're imagining me here? No. You're literally in my home right now. And you also aren't supposed to be real. Yet, here we are. Even now, he never blinked. Smile easy. He placed his hands flat on his lap, tapping a little pattern before answering. Would you be kind enough to humor me? You wished he wasn't so creative in his choice of conversations. He spoke lots when you played games, so why not now? Look, the cat's out of the bag. I know your dirty little secret. Why haven't you told me you can leave the phone? You rolled your eyes, shaking your head. You had to stifle down your growing anger, because no matter how much you wanted to shout at him, you needed him to cooperate, and luring him into a civil conversation was the best you could offer. He seemed to understand that you were having a conversation with him, or he was purposely getting on your nerves by ignoring you. He rocked in his heels, taking his sweet time getting up. Standing tall, he dusted off his knees before tucking his hands behind his back. You stepped away, gaping at him. Instead of standing 12 apples tall, or whatever ambiguously short height you expected he was your height. Eye to unblinking eye, exactly even. Sensing your question, he shrugged and continued to stare. Unwavering in his resolve to not answer your questions, you narrowed your eyes. There was another thing you could have asked him, because that certainly wasn't expected. He was supposed to be tiny by most standards. He finally spoke up, after minutes of you losing a staring contest against him. He tilted his head, feline smirk dancing on his lips as he wiggled his pinky finger in the air. I'm here because I can't break my promise. What sort of neighbor would I be if I didn't keep it? You blinked, mind racing. What promise? You don't remember making any sort of promise with him. Oh, don't be like that, friend. You want answers, don't you? And before you mention it, it really isn't breaking a promise if the other person doesn't remember making it. It's polite not to mention it because the other person will feel bad forgetting. Anyways, neighbor, you weren't well enough to understand me earlier. There is so much to unpack here in what you just said. Wally cocked his head. What do you mean? I didn't give you anything you can open. You sighed, massaging your temples. You genuinely thought he was charming, but when you shared banter during various games you played, though thinking about it, you weren't sure if that was genuine or influenced by the unthinking days you've been in. But now he was frustrating, dodging your questions with his carefree smile, standing in the perfect spots so that you couldn't see whatever he had been scrubbing. Will you at least tell me what you were doing in my kitchen, beyond just helping out? Doing some spring cleaning. Don't worry about it. Now, how about we go sit down? He marched up and gently grabbed your shoulders, guiding you back to the couch. The firmness of his hands was shocking, not because of the strength he used, but due to the jolting reminder that he was actually real. In an odd way, talking to him felt almost normal, if you pretended he was still on the phone. He implanted himself in your life so well that the idea of his absence felt wrong. It was the physical sensation of his hands that you found shocking. Just the fact that he existed. It meant that you couldn't pretend that he was a weird bug or an app on your phone. You couldn't pretend that you deluded yourself into believing some sort of weird graphics were really alive, For how could he be alive while living in a digital life? Now you were forced to recognize that it was true that the phone was a link between realities, and that his reality existed in the same way yours did, that you were interacting beyond the bonds of the comprehended universe. Wally was an impossibility brought to life, or rather one that fought to become real in your world, and you still didn't know how he did so. you also didn't know why he wanted to leave his world so badly. He hummed as he went about, collecting a few things, before joining you. He moved confidently around your apartment, knowing exactly which closet where you kept your spare blankets in as he took one out, folding it lengthwise. He leaned down and tucked it around your shoulders like a shawl, patting you on the shoulders before moving on. Next, he went into the kitchen, putting on a kettle you didn't own to heat up water. Within a few minutes, he had 2 steaming cups, both in mugs distinctively lacking any circles. He was still humming as he tidied up and brought out what turned out to be tea. Wally handing you a mug with another lingering pat onto your shoulder. You frowned. He was oddly touchy. Cautiously, you reached out and grabbed his hand. Wally stopped humming with a sharp inhale, freezing in place with huge eyes staring down at you. His hand was soft, the skin like a dense layer of felt that, if you pressed down, which you did only after you were confident he wouldn't pull away, your fingers could sink into. You could feel some sort of bone structure similar to your own hand, though buried deeper and under his plushy flesh unlike your own. Experimentally, you dragged your thumb over his knuckles, and his reaction confirmed your suspicion. He looked away, cheeks dusting sunny orange, his smile wavering as he began rocking on his heels once more. Unsurprisingly, once you thought it over, Wally appeared to be touch-starved, or at least it looked that way, with how he generally stepped away once you let his hand go, looking down at it and when he thought you weren't looking. You had been preparing to give him a piece of your mind, but what you felt now was almost pity. Hadn't he done something to earn this anger? You hadn't questioned it before, but where had he been before your phone? Previously, you assumed he was with the rest of the home residents. However, he surely wouldn't be so eager for interaction if that was the case. There was a possibility that it was just something he did. After all, you'd be a little bit nervous if you were in his shoes, but that didn't sound right. From what media you remember, Wally always sounded like a laid-back guy, unflappably patient. The sort of person that if his efforts proved to be in vain, he'd shrug and say there were more days to try, saying that it was a learning experience. And certainly, the Wally before you was languid, perfectly content and taking his time. Yet it was more like a performance, a game of charades you stumbled into and only now learned how it went. The small habits of his gave him away. He wasn't sure, possibly as uncomfortable as you were. Steeling yourself, you coughed to catch his attention. It was now or never. The final moment before whatever he dumped on you. You couldn't remember the promise made, so you shot a vague prompt to worm as much information from him as you could. He owed you this, and you were going to make him talk, whether he worked with you or not. You took a sip of tea before you spoke. So, tell me everything. And then a lot of fucking secret code, guys. A lot of fucking secret code. Let's look into the comments to see if anyone could figure out the secret codes. Because there's a lot. Okay. This person, Luna Moon, I'm pretty sure this is the same person that, also gave us the secret code in the last video, which, thank you, commenter. You will be remembered. But let's read Luna Moon's comment, because this is a lot of stuff. Alright. This seems to be in the beginning. Is it a crime to want to protect those you care deeply for? I only ever wanted to keep you safe, but protection is no easy thing to offer, it seems. My dear neighbor, would you see if it was within yourself to forgive someone who only wanted to help? Would you forgive me if you knew what I do? Please understand. Okay. My theory is that the home zone isn't the creation of the spiral, and is in fact the creation of a being who, I'm so certain, is home. that I'm just going to keep calling them as such until I'm proven otherwise. I'm just going to refer to as such. I love the taste of your Rooney little mind. Just got to the part where Wally asked you asked Wally to make you forget. Okay. Alright. Yes, but honestly, I think the appeal of being friends with an eldritch being is that you can have someone hit C3L plus Z if you peep the horror a little too hard. Honestly, let's pick it. I'm gonna skip down to where there's more code. Sorry to cut it short, guys. You lived alone in a place with few neighbors that was also fairly isolated. Even few even knew of its location. This may be my anti-landlord bias, but I'm so fucking sure that Rosie is up to some fuck shit. Even if she wasn't going to sacrifice MC to the spiral, she totes was up to something. I don't trust that. Stop trying to solve the living mystery that wants to consume you. Just trust me. Don't falter. That's kind of fucking scary. Code being solve the mystery that wants to consume you. Here begins the visitation of the being known as you. This is crazy. Preferred by entropy, I indulge in the ruin it shall leave in its quake. For it is no more than new growth in the soil you will sow. In killed spirit of rejection, as you have done to me, I will take away to improve. A reduction of deductions, a blindness to the truth. I will take away your sense of knowing, so that you cannot recognize my presence. After all, it's a human thing, is it not? To find amusement in being blindfolded in surprise. As an empath, I'm sensing that the spiral might not take rejection well. You asked me to forget. If I was forced to view my horrors behind my comprehension, I would simply comprehend them. R.I.P. to MC, but I'm different. I'm not going to even bother and say which message I think is coming from the spiral. The second and third lines of the Casey cipher are obviously Wally, and history would suggest that the first line is also Wally. But a part of me feels like it might be home. I think the person telling us not to look any deeper into the mystery was Wally. Jesus Christ, god damn! That is amazing. And then that is just amazing. Thank you so much, Luna Moon. Sorry I was not able to read your full comment, but all the codes and everything was greatly appreciated. This is the author Synchro Void, and they said to Luna Moon that they got all of the hidden messages and ciphers correct, and that is amazing. I'm so happy for them. They are a bad biche, period. Anywho, we got all the ciphers that are the ciphering that we needed for this chapter. Let's go on to the next one. Chapter 14, Aurora Borealis. Summary. I think, therefore I am, is not the saying goes. It's how the saying goes. For you, it's different. You think before he shall be. Secret code, guys. Secret code. We're going to figure this out, guys. The silence was disturbing. The time you had last heard another person, let alone another person in these walls, had been a long time. It stretched out like a taffy looped into itself. Strings of time lost and strands of time remembered intertwining into your faltering memory. You had grown unaccustomed to the noise, found it jarring compared to the empty audio landscape you previously lived in. Back then, you only heard your own breathing, but now that changed, and you hadn't realized how grating it would be until this very moment. It wasn't just the sound of your blood rushing in your ears at the sound of your heart thumping with life anymore. The tapping of your fingers wasn't the only drumming in your environment. It wasn't even the loudest anymore. While originally off-putting, the level of control over all audio sensations had become comforting. You learned to seek it out. As many other noises sounded wrong, disjointed, it became a comforting blanket you wrapped yourself in, a layer of protection against the strangeness that overtook your apartment. It was deafening. Sure, Wally spoke to you during those times, but but his voice had been confined within the phone. It was less present then, less real, less everything, other than the rare spike of static blurring whatever noise he did make, the sound of shuffling of feet or clink of objects too rare to remember. No other sound came from the phone, just his voice, and now that was no longer the case. You could hear the subtle movements of Wally settling into the cushioned chair, fabric rubbing against itself, foam insides giving into his weight. You could hear his breathing, slower than yours. It was awkward, clumsy, unused. The pauses between breaths were too long, inhales hitching and lagging, even when it smoothed out. After the silence between you both grew uncomfortable, it was still peculiar. It was the mini cry of the action, breathing for not the sake of living, but rather for the simple fact it could be done. A sort of why not situation, where the dichotomy between his puppet and human-like nature fought against each other, producing an uncanny valley effect, except it didn't, because it was less overwhelming than the steady breathing of another human like yourself, because it was Wally. It didn't, only because he was familiar in the world where nothing stayed the same. You didn't know when your brain began placing Wally in a separate category from the rest of everyone you knew. However, he now sat in a unique position in your mental eye. Neither friend nor foe nor acquaintance. Your relationship with him, whatever it was off balance by power dynamics. You, the master of the phone, him, the hante, depending on you. He was someone you grew to know more than anyone else you knew otherwise. Someone you began to understand, learned to read his own personal brand of social language. You saw Wally as himself and no longer a suggestion of what he could be, what he should be. It was terrifying, in a way, because he shouldn't exist at all. Not as a living being, not as a facsimile of such. He was built to be a puppet and nothing more, attached to strings and forced to dance. His fate was sealed by his very nature, and yet he was not, evolving into his own puppet master, rewriting his very existence into sentience. He reached beyond anything that he was intended to be. It was fascinating, you couldn't deny that, but it was worrying. You could pretend to know him, to have grown used to his quirks and existence, but at the end of the day, you didn't know what he was. You didn't know why, the how, the reasons behind what he was doing. You didn't know how much power he did have or what power he didn't. You didn't know where he stood between you and the something. There was something else, right? What were you thinking about? You were so glad you couldn't remember. Truly you were. But it made thinking so much more difficult. The sheer number of unknowns was daunting, but you learned how to embrace it. Or you told yourself that. The human adaptability can only be pushed so far, lest it snap and leave you in ruins. Currently, Wally was watching you with half-lidded eyes, head tilted and smile easy. It was as if he could hear your thoughts, his smile twitching when you pondered him, people shaking when you questioned the unknown. You felt like you were on display, a sea of cameras eagerly watching your every move, drinking in every moment regardless of how meaningless. At that moment, he chose to look away, or at the very least he pretended to, for your assumed comfort, shifting his body weight and turning around to check out the place in all but reality. For the entire time, he kept his gaze on you, trapping you, making sure he always knew where you were, and you couldn't tell, based purely off of how perfectly he placed his mug of tea down without sparing a glance. They had an intimate understanding of your apartment's layout. It was down to the inner details where your side table was, where the chain of the lamp dangled free, the distance between every nook and cranny and himself. And it could have been normal. and it could have been the passing familiarity of the actions warped through the paranoia to appear overly intimate with your home. It could have been, if it hadn't been for the fact that it was Wally Darling sitting there. Wally, who wasn't of your world. Wally, who hadn't understand your need to eat until you explained it to him. Wally, who lived in the cage of your phone for however long and by all means shouldn't be so used to your apartment. After all, no matter how many times you watched a video within one setting, you could only be acquaintance with the visuals of it and not the physical makeup. You wouldn't understand how the breeze danced between the leaves and how it felt against your face. Nor could you feel the rough whisker basket handle in your hands, or the smell or the scent of food within wafting free. You would recognize the aesthetics and you could replicate it, but it would be impossible to truly understand what it would be like to be there unless you previously were there yourself. A quirk of reality, a simple fact of nature. Vision was the human's primary sense, but the visual aesthetics weren't the only component in the creation of existence. What were you implying? How long did Wally have this ability and did not tell you? He sighed, turned to face you once more, legs crossed, foot swaying as he leaned back in the armchair. His behavior wasn't confrontational in the slightest, and yet he stood out, highlighted compared to the dull banality of the environment of the apartment, as if he was glowing, luminous in the vapid haze. A captured star gleaming with energy gained from billions of years of the constant state of being, simultaneously new and learning. He was still studying how to be. You weren't used to being around other people anymore. Was that bad? It didn't feel like a bad thing, but you weren't so sure you should trust yourself. Wally set both hands on his knees and folded his fingers together. His eyes, still half-lidded, were larger now as he peered deep into yours with a similar curiosity as you felt towards him. You could still see your own reflection within them. See how you were no longer yourself. Hair messy, skin paler than normal, a downgrade from your typical self. A mycology settled in your guts. It was the only reflection in the entire space. You weren't supposed to notice that. Did you learn nothing? He coughed before he spoke, the same comforting voice you were sharing your life with. It would be my pleasure to answer your question, neighbor, but explain everything. Everything includes so much, it would take forever to explain it all, but I can try if that's what you want. He leaned forwards, glancing around wearily before gesturing for you to lean forwards too. His eyes were bigger, larger and larger as you leaned towards him, too intrigued to refuse. Up close, you could see the light dusting of fuzz on his skin, golden yellow and nearly clear. Faintly, as he paused and stared, you could hear him breathing. He cupped his hand around your ear, and you shook the thought of finally knowing. What you have in your hand there, my friend, is a mug. This man, I'm gonna smack this bitch. For real? Really? I didn't know that. You blinked. He noticeably never did. Also called a cup. This one is made out of clay that was fired in a kiln to become ceramic, used for Wally. You deadpan. That's obviously not what I meant. He laughed, head thrown back and eyes curled shut. It was as halting and different as you remembered. Now free of the fuzzy disorienting it had through the phone. He tried speaking, but the words were lost in the sound of his slow, monotone giggles. He couldn't hold them in even when he tried, arms wrapping around his torso like a hug, failing to restrict it. You could see the corner of his eyes partially, because it was hard to tell based on his felt-like nature of his skin. But so far, his expressions seemed based on human ones. So you thought the same principles applied? Wrinkled? Now his cheeks still carried the sunset orange tinge, how his shoulders shook. Though you weren't sure if he was toning his reflection down or exaggerating it. You could still notice that he was happy. He was content, at peace despite the impossible circumstance. Or at least that's what he wanted you to believe. Or maybe he was, and you were thinking too much. Buried under the confidence, the aura of carefully thought out actions and cherry-picked words, he excluded a worrisome lack of control. It wasn't just based on how he looked. His hair falling free from the strict pompadour, strands tumbling around his face and sticking out haphazardly, faint bags under his eyes, a dull purple infused gold that you could only really see when he closed his eyes, but also with how he was behaving. He was fighting from slouching into the chair, the arms around him keeping him upright. His staring was too intense, not just with how he stared into your eyes, but also in the area around you, searching and searching, seeking for something else, something that wasn't you. And there was those still icky fingerprints on the collar of his shirt, the tips of his fingers still tainted, stained black. What had he been doing in the kitchen? You weren't supposed to want to know. Weren't you happy to forget? There was something else going on. I'm sorry, neighbor, I simply couldn't help myself. Wally returned to tapping his fingers, eyes soft. The very picture of a polite gentleman, back straight and tone peaceful. The folds of his clothes spread smooth and ascot perfectly centered. It was uncanny. How quickly he could change. The more you searched, the more you noticed the edges of him were blurry, filtering behind a light haze. You were supposed to stop searching. Why couldn't you stop yourself from noticing? Just answer my question, Mr. Know-It-All. Why are you here? How are you here? What happened to my apartment? And what the hell is in my kitchen that you don't want me to see? My. You have so many questions, neighbor. I thought you weren't into that anymore. You froze. The air tasted of smoke. What was he talking about? Had you talked before? Was this not the first time he'd sat down and explained things to you? You were aware that your memory had been failing you recently, but you were getting better, weren't you? Sure, the last however long had been a blurry, changeless rhythm of mindless activities. But wouldn't you remember something like this? Wouldn't the shock of you seeing a fictional character waltz around in your apartment to be something that stood out to you? Or was he referring to that? The strange dream you had? A semi-lucid cacophony of pseudo-sensations masquerading as a new way of experiencing the world? Surely not, and how could he? Even if you didn't. Even if you knew that it happened. And that it had been absolutely, undeniably horrible. Tasting the everlasting flavor of passing oblivion. The connectivity to everything and nothing, and the terrible, terrible pain of having the molecules of your very being ripped apart. That was more than you should remember. Why were you remembering? You didn't want to remember. He couldn't. He couldn't be referring to that because he couldn't have known. It was a dream, nothing more. It wasn't connected to anything else. Why were you thinking about it? You agreed you didn't want to know. You begged not to know. Illness swirled in your stomach. Headache building as you fought with your own mind. Two parts of you were screaming out. One pleading for you to leave these thoughts be and escape with a distraction. The other demanded you keep search for the answer, demanding you never step down until you got it. Wally took your silence as an answer, even though you hadn't fully processed the implication of his words. I guess you still don't remember. Well, don't think about it. I must have gotten my words mixed up. Silly me. You couldn't look up at him. You couldn't stand looking into those eyes, because you knew that he hadn't misspoken. Wally, as you've learned, didn't say things for no reason. Each word was always purposeful, even if the purpose itself was to have none. Another paradoxical feature of his existence. Logic warped from the norm of your world while making perfect sense to him. You had to adapt to it. Your voice caught in your throat, clinging there. You searched for the words, racking through your mind to find the exact question to ask. You needed to know what was going on, but you had to stay away from the certain trains of thoughts or risk falling on the tracks. Crushed under them and swept back into the foggy abyss you barely escaped from. Wally was watching you eagerly, scooting to the edge of his seat. The tapping of his fingers sped up, harsh in your ears. With clenched teeth, you eternally yelled at yourself. This shouldn't be so hard, and it shouldn't be so difficult to just think. But the longer you tried, the worse it got, the pressure building and the discord within strengthening. You shouldn't do this. You agreed not to. You didn't want to. You didn't want to know. You wanted to drift off in the peaceful arms of ignorance and never let go. So why couldn't you stop yourself? You looked around, feet shuffling on the carpet below as you pondered what you could do. What didn't come with restrictions enforced by something you didn't understand? If you went broad, but not too much, surely you'd get some sort of answer out of him, like casting a net wide. You were starting to get at least a few fishes, even if you already had some tucked away somewhere. At least it could be confirmation of your suspicions. You swallowed down anxiety. How are you here? Eternally, you fist bumped yourself, proud of coming up with a question that could lead him down into explaining more. Why you were here? What happened to your apartment? Why was your head so heavy? And most importantly, what the hell was up with Wally? Too tall, too aware, too free from the phone. But it was more important to know the how, because it could give a foundation to lay the rest of the answers upon. His smirk was back. How am I? I'm doing peachy. How are you, dear friend? You wilted. Couldn't he take you seriously? You deserved answers. You had the right to understand your own surroundings, did you not? You frowned as he laughed again, Wally waving his hands to lighten the mood as he noticed how unamused you were. I know. You really want to know why I'm here. Sorry, neighbor, but you're just so fun. I said how, not why. Sure. But don't go sharing this with anyone. This is our little secret, okay? Promise me you won't tell anyone. The air chilled, his pupils expanding. They pulled you in, reaching over the distance between you, both of you, and grabbing hold of your shoulders, holding you tight, pinning you in place. You couldn't look away. His words rang in your head, booming in your ears. They were weighty, important, dragging you downwards, deeper into the abyss, hands trembling. You tried not to choke under the pressure. Still, you floundered. What were you agreeing to? This wasn't normal. This was far from normal. It was unbelievable. Who would you tell? Who could you tell? Who would ever believe you? You nodded. He appeared satisfied with that answer. I'll bet if not more intense than before. Pupils flared, eyes yawning wide, smile spreading too far. Wally swayed closer, sitting on the very edge of his seat, elbows on his knees, hands entangled in fingers dancing. He looked giddy, erupted whatever you agreed to. You made the right decision, right? Oh, my dear friend, you won't regret this, not at all. Now I can tell you if you want to know. It's so exciting. I bet you'll even understand me this time. So, are you ready? All settled in? He clapped his hands together, his bubbly exterior contradicted by the flat tone of his voice. It was a little louder now that he was excited, but still barely a step away from being droning. The sense of dread built, low and warning in your guts. It bit at your stomach walls, a slithering, snaking illness compounded by the chill in the air. The intensity in his gaze. This time, what did he mean? What did that mean? What did that imply? Had he told you this before? Had you had this conversation before? Surely you would have remembered. It's really quite simple. I'm here because you thought of me. Quite a lot, in fact. The more you thought of me, the more you filled the gaps in the concept of me in your world. You made it more accurate, neighbor. Which means I can visit you now. Really, I must thank you, neighbor, because it's you who let me be here. But I didn't. Oh, I know you didn't know. But isn't that the fun part? Just by being friends, you gave me life. How lovely is that? The sinking feeling got worse. He was speaking faster now, getting up from the chair and swiftly moving closer, sitting back down on the table by you. His words kept flowing, like he couldn't stop them. Exhilarated that you were there to listen, but it wasn't right. You weren't speaking, you were only reacting, lagging behind the sheer energy he excluded, dazzling in the in the dull apartment. Does that mean, oh, don't be silly, friend. I wasn't using you. It hurts how you think about me that way about me. We're friends, right? And friends help each other out. And you certainly helped me. The unsettling dread became heavier with each word shared. It was familiar in the intensity, in the hunger you felt to understand, in the hunger you felt prowling in your mind, bouncing on every thought you had, shredding it as he responded without you verbalizing them. It was as if he was in your very mind. Presence too much for your world, too much for you to handle. How does that? I told you in the simplest way I can, but I can explain it again for you, neighbor. By knowing me, you fed energy into my existence here, building the conceptual me of your world into something more me. And the more you thought, the more energy was given. And now it's stable enough that I can be here. Isn't that just swell? He reached out hesitantly before briefly grabbing your hand, shaking it vigorously with both of his, grinning even wider. Yes, I must thank you. So, you freed me. This isn't enough. How can I show you how thankful I am? He let go of your hand, pulling back like you burned him. Shaking his head, Wally curled inwards as he thought. Still as a statue, other than quick-paced tapping of his foot, you stared, gapping at him. You didn't like the implication of his words. You didn't like how he pushed the power onto you. You weren't the one to make the portal. You weren't the one to trap him on the phone. You weren't the one that dragged him into any of this. You never forced him to stick around, right? You couldn't have, because you didn't have that power. That would have been ridiculous, absurd. You were no different than any other person. So why did he pretend that you were so special? Wally? You couldn't have done anything like that. But maybe, from his perspective, what are you to him? As a puppet, is he aware what he was built for? Did he consider himself a puppet? Does he still consider himself a puppet? Did he ever? He snapped his fingers, jumping up from the table. His eyes were still gaping too wide, his stare too intense, altogether too much. He gestured wildly as he spoke, smoothing out the wrinkles of his clothes as he spun to face you. Wally, I got it. I'll make you food. You need that, right, to survive? What do you want to eat? How do you eat? I saw you through the phone, but I want to learn more. I want to learn everything Wally! He froze, tilting his head. His foot was still tapping, growing faster as you looked at him. You could practically feel the waves of excitement rolling off of him, the lights burning brighter. You didn't know what you wanted. You didn't know what to say, but you needed him to explain himself before he got too distracted. It wasn't fair for him to know, and it wasn't fair for him to pretend it was simple when it wasn't. Concepts weren't real. They were words to describe what was real. How could he exist if the concepts of him, whatever that meant, wasn't solid in your world? Did he understand the significance of his claims? That if thought enough, something could be reincarnated into your world. That it could hijack the shared thoughts into a body to breathe with, into a life to live in. What do you mean that I brought you here? Humans can't do that. You know that, right? We can create, but we can't bring things to life. You knew he already explained himself, and that made sense. It wasn't that you needed help understanding. It was the importance of those words. How if you took it not as an interesting thought experiment, but rather a true fact of reality? It went against how you know the physical world to function. He hummed, looking down at his hands. You followed the sight, puzzled. His hands looked like any other human's hands, if ignored the obvious difference of sunflower yellow fleece and fingernails that were merely sunny orange, thread woven into semicircles. The fleece moved like skin, and he seemed to be able to feel through it too, the fabric having no sway over his sense of touch. With 4 fingers and a thumb, though more full and rounded than your own fingers, they were strikingly similar. Holding them out where you could clearly see, he flexed them. First the pinky, then moving inwards until each finger moved. Then he clenched his fist, rotating around as you examined them. The stains were still on his fingertips, covering all the felt up to the first knuckle before fading into a murky green-tinged gray. There wasn't a single freckle nor a string out of place. The perfect anatomical fusion between human and puppet, based on what you saw in front of you. I guess you don't remember, do you, neighbor? The idea of me you have is more me than anything else in your world, but it isn't fully accurate. See my hands? I'm supposed to have 3 fingers, not 4. He focused, unclenching his hands and holding them in his face, pupils flaring wider as he stared at them. The air chilled once more, thick in your lungs. Subconsciously, you shifted back, instincts begging you to move away. Don't worry, friend. I can fix your mistake. But please stop thinking about our conversation, okay? Your thoughts are already so loud, and that isn't good. I worry about you, you know? His hands filled your vision once more. He flexed them once, then twice, humming as he did so. You watched in horror as his pinky finger began shrinking, thinning and thinning until it was no more than a spindly twig off the branch of his palm. Like leftover thread from the sewing tangled from the sides of his hands. Palms now slimmer, fingers ever so wider and rounder. The strings twisted in the air as they slowly snaked back under his skin, disappearing with a sickly sucking noise. You struggled with the unwell sensation bubbling in your stomach, the illness clawing at your throat. The wrongness of the sight made your head spin. Wally winked at you, clapping his hands once more. That wasn't too bad. See, it's all fixed. Your vision was blurry, eyes burning as you struggled to focus on anything. It was disorienting, disturbing, discordant in a way that you could finally actually taste. Your surroundings flickered dark, the sunlight disappearing, the lights vanishing, including everything lurched back, throwing you into the couch, tossing you like a rag doll. There was a layer of dust on everything, and the air stale. Wally fizzled in front of you, jumping from where he previously was to this new position, as if he teleported. You struggled to focus on him, the darkness oozing over your surroundings, everything steadily drifting away until you were only left with the sight of him. You couldn't even see your own hands where you had held them up, not even your own body when you looked down. Wally carefully felt your forehead, pushing away any strands of hair to feel your temperature. You struggled to push him away, to touch the touch burning, the sight of Wally painful. The world kept flickering between the shadows and the bright, warm, ransacked apartment you came to feel safe in, like it was struggling between the two. Wally's presence the only thing unchanging between them. He covered your eyes, monotone humming filling your ears. Oh dear, you must really stop thinking so hard. You only make it worse. Take a deep breath and focus on me. Can you do that, neighbor? Look at me and ignore whatever you think you're seeing, okay? You're safe with me. You blinked. You didn't understand what he was saying. The world went white. You heard the phone ring. You finally remembered. He was the one to make you forget. And a lot of freaking code. So yes. Let's find the code, my guys. Let's find the code. If it'll load. Thank you. Okay, this is from Luna Moon. Babish, I tell you. Let's read Luna Moons. Is there a limit of how many times something can be changed before it doesn't recognize itself? Is that the same for memories? Or are they so naturally ignorant to their own manipulation, unreliable that is never noticed? Let's try again. And then we're going to skip right here. Sometimes that's formerly been exclusively Wally, and that being the sounds like Wally, but I'm pretty sure it's home. That's not great. Love the imaginary of Wally breathing more because he knows the absence of breath would make MC uncomfortable. But at the same time, not getting it quite right and making MC uncomfortable anyway. Real uncanny valley vibes. Yeah, because imagine there's a doll, like a puppet, your height, acting like it is a normal, alive thing, and breathing, but not breathing normally. You know, but it would be worse if he didn't. It's worse either way, whether he breathed wrong or not. Like, if he didn't breathe at all, you couldn't even tell if he was, like, alive, you know. Can't just, I would be scared. Just imagine, like, you're sitting in a chair, just, you know, just looking at this puppet that's the same size as you, and as soon as you stand up, the fucking puppet stands up, and you're like, oh my god, and then accidentally punch the puppet. No. Hell no, hell no. That's a little too scary. Anyways, you are a fool, and I will be your downfall. Wally really said, I don't want them to ask me any more questions because that's dangerous. Instead of giving them a fake answer to satisfy their curiosity, I will instead give them the most cryptic motherfucking imaginable. Surely, that will make them just accept the weirdness. Everlasting favor of passing oblivion. This is how college students talk about energy drinks. I know, it's just... Ugh. You will never hurt them. I won't allow it. I live within them. I'm a part of them. See, this is clearly Wally speaking. What is the moon without the light of the sun? A lifeless rock left to orbit in the graveyard of dying galaxies, to spin for infinity, or it crumbles away. Harvest from the widespread consciousness. A killing force of nature. The master of tides and oceans. The moon still has power without the sun. It merely gains the ability to exist undetected. How fascinating it must be to see a sky filled with hidden moons and finally realize that they exist. How fascinating it must be for you to finally be seen within the eyes of the moon. Can't thank you, no. Can't thank you now. Honestly, this has left me stumped because it feels like it could be a toss-up between the Spiral or Wally saying this. I'm leaning towards Spiral, but I feel like the Spiral would have had some cryptic bullshit that basically meant, I'm the moon and I'm gonna eat you. And several times, the reader was referred to as some variation of light or the sun, which would make Wally the moon. Then again, the Spiral, along with being called aurora, had been referred to as being the endless night and that death connects to the moon. I'm thumbtacking this to my corkboard. I don't really have the string to connect to this yet, but when I do, no, I'll brain rot about it. It's freaking hilarious. I'm gonna skip it down a little bit. And then this is... Oh my goodness. Ugh, my throat is killing me. But it's worth it. I'm sorry. And then this is some little side notes for them. And then they're like, did you know when you delete stuff off your phone, it's not actually gone? Many criminals have made incriminating in your notepad or had taken photos or sent texts they shouldn't have. They hit the little trash can on their phones and computers but to their shock, the police were able to retrieve those just fine. Because when you think you've deleted those files, they often end up going to a backup area that have been cleared separately, and that is often a very difficult thing. On a related note, I think I know that the strike point text is. Anyways, yeah, they like the chapter. Oh my goodness, I'm literally gonna pass away. God darn. Anyways. Let me see, that's the author. Let's see. And there's a little bit more theories. And then the author, Synchrovoid, describing, and I'm so sorry, my throat really, really hurts, and I really don't want to continue. I'm sorry. But anyways, we are going to end on chapter 14 because I usually read just 2 chapters per video because they are painfully long, but good quality chapters that, you know, need time to be edited properly, of course. Anywho, guys, I hope you did enjoy it, though. So, do you guys have any theories upon what exactly Wally is doing and why he is not giving us the direct answers that we so apparently crave for. And another question, what do you think YN is in or at or mentally? Where do you think they at? Because honestly, I'm just stumped as much as the next person next to me reading this. I am stumped. Like, I'm like, are we in a virtual reality? Are we in an actual reality? Are we in real life? Are we not? It is so confused. I'm so confused. I'm a little confused, and I really, really am curious to find out. But we're gonna have to find out as we read more and more of this. I'm super duper excited. We're gonna get revealed more and more, as you can see in the chapter index. We got, oh my god, no. There's 2 more left. Oh no. Oh no. Well, hopefully in the next 2 chapters we will figure out what the hell is going on, because crazy, guys. It is insanity. When I tell you it's insanity, guys. My throat is killing me. Anywho, guys, I hope you guys did enjoy it, though. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more amazing videos, guys. Sadly, your girl's gotta go. But before I do you guys have any, if you guys have any, like, advice or any critiques or anything you would like me to change up a little bit about the channel, I'm trying to see if I can get some kind of new perspectives of what I could do to improve the channel, make it a little better, make it sparkle. You know, I've thought of some ideas, but I want to know your guys's, because you guys are the one watching this, you know, willing to put through with me, and, you know, just listening along as I read. So your guys' opinions are valid. You know what I'm saying? The critiques, everything is always needed to keep moving. You know what I'm saying? Obviously not like you're borderline bullying me, but that has not happened yet. But we shall see. You never know. Hopefully not, though. Anywho, guys, your girl's got to officially go now, guys. Hopefully you have an amazing day, and I shall see y'all in the next futuristic video. Bye, guys.